novel story as long as the steppe.
Bonjour.
Good afternoon. Where's the monument to Jules Verne? Missing archives and fatty tale tasting, exotic excursions, foreseeing the future and looking into the secrets of the past. Everything so strange and mysterious. Paris, Amiens and the steppe. There was always a lot of gossip about Jules Verne, and he himself was a master of mystification. But toward the end of his life, all these rumors, all the talk began to bother him. For example, the most unpleasant gossip about him was that he had died. They always gave people plenty of reasons to gossip, slander and spread provocative rumors. There was yet another story, the mystery of the three, almost a mystery story. One of them had never been to France, the other person had never been to Kazakhstan, and the situation with the third one was murky to say the least. He wrote that he had been here, but some researchers believe that he just used the materials of the first person, Pushkin, Verne and Dumas. Chapter 1. The Chansonnier of the Steppe. They breed sheep with phenomenal tails, fat tails. According to some travelers, the sheep are hardly able to move around on their own, and the fat-tailed sheep have to be carried around in wheelbarrows. We have not seen the wheelbarrows, but we've seen the sheep and the fat tails. We even got to taste one of these tails, which weighed approximately 10 to 12 pounds. And even though it consisted entirely of fat, with the exception of the animal's bones, it was one of the most exquisite and delicious dishes that I've ever tasted. For 20 years the great gourmet and writer dreamed about this trip. Although he'd already travelled all over Europe, his thoughts and fantasies were set on the mysterious land, where west and east converge. It was a strange acquaintance, if a little superficial. He only rode along the edge of the steppe border, but the journey fascinating nonetheless. The land captivated the writer's imagination with its limitless expanses. Everything happened exactly as he had dreamed it would. Busted hunts and fishing trips, to quote the man himself, local sturgeons so fleshy they're big enough to feed an entire village. This is the pride of our region, our redfish, beluga, sturgeon, busted sturgeon, starry sturgeon and many other kinds of fish. The fish used to be so big. Old literature describes specimen as long as 9 meters, weighing up to 2 tons. On the advice of the local general, he promises to make a 3-day trip to Kyrgyzstan. They are Magomed's ancestors and are divided into 3 hordes, large, medium and small, wrote Dumas in his travel notes. Alexander Dumas was using an impressive range of information about Kazakh steppes. The collection consists of 7 books, an impossible amount to collect in just 1 year. But still one's very own eyes and ears are far better instruments than ancient and not so ancient tomes. Astrakhan steppes, Atrau and western Kazakhstan, the author of the 3 Musketeers. Alexander Dumas dedicated his book to these 3 places. He was very much impressed with nomadic lifestyle. Scarce yachts and lone travelers were encountered on the journey, riders traveling from one nomadic station to another tied to their long spikes, as he wrote. A small group of travelers wandering in the limitless depths of the melancholic steppes. They were never disturbed by the nomads. The writer stated in his travel notes, Kyrgyz gentlemen never allow themselves to attack with weapons in their hands. 300 steppe miles and finally, the purpose of the travel was reached. The tents, sheltering groups of women and children, and 10 to 12 feet in diameter and therefore 30 to 36 feet in circumference. Inside is a couch or felted cloth, a wardrobe and some kitchen utensils. They are made of felt and have a pyramidal shape with a hole at the top to let out the smoke. Such a wonderful description, exact in some aspects, less so in others. But the writer regarded history as only a nail on which the narratives of his novels were to be hung. There was another history-related story, which was absolutely incredible. Apparently, either legally or illegally, Alexander Dumas became the owner of a unique archive containing a plethora of secrets and mysteries. Chapter 2. Science fiction writer from Amiens. After the laying of the Trans-Asian Railway, endless strings of riders, pedestrians, horses, camels, donkeys and carts as goods has disappeared. And yet I'm not afraid of my journey from Central Asia being any less amusing. The reporter from the 20th century will be able to make it interesting. Two great French writers of the 19th century, Alexandre Dumas and Jules Verne, popularized Kazakh steppe in France and throughout Europe.
Dans le public occidental, une vision de l'Asie centrale.
But this would happen much later. At the time, he'd just arrived from Nantes, a poor student who loathed jurisprudence, his family's business. He loved theatre and was friends with the Dumas Jr. Alexandre Dumas Jr. and Jules Verne wrote the play Broken Straws. It was a huge success, and that was when he got acquainted with Alexandre Dumas' Sine, the father. The two chansonniers of the Kazakh steppes met in Paris. At the beginning, Alexandre Dumas wanted to hire Jules Verne as his literary assistant. It is no secret that the writer employed a whole office of so-called literature slaves. The writer was at the stage of creating an outline for the new novel, working out the sequence of events, and everything else was prepared for him by his literary assistants. Jules Verne, however, was far too independent for this kind of job. Meeting the most colorful character of the French capital turned his life upside down. They say that after meeting with Alexandre Dumas for the first time, Jules Verne exclaimed, "What he has done for history, I shall do for geography." Indeed, much later French students would study steppe geography using Mikhail Strogoff as a textbook. Verne's description of the cities, nations, nature and climate were precise, flawless. September was fast approaching and the days were getting shorter. Local autumn is distinguished by its short duration. Sometimes winter comes immediately after summer. These early winters are astonishing in their outrageous brutality. Sometimes the cold is so extreme that the mercury in the thermometer drops to a freezing point, 42 degrees below zero. Frosty weather at 20 degrees is considered quite tolerable. The works that mention Kazakhstan and Kazakh historical heroes were written by Jules Verne in the comfort and calm atmosphere of his house in Amiens. There was no more need to rush or hurry. However, in order to write on this subject, he required certain material. That was when his personal archives came in handy. The house with the tower, a model of the motion of stars in the solar system. The wall is an illustration to all his favorite books at once. In the 19th century, the first lights in the city were lit in these windows, while for those who got up even earlier than city bakers.
He wrote from 5 in the morning.
He got up at 5 in the morning and kept writing until 11. He wrote 2 novels a year. Claudio's Bombarnek, a story of a journalist's travel to the steppe, was written in this house. It is nothing short of fantastic. It is estimated that more than a dozen of Jules Verne's predictions have come true. Video and television communications, helicopters and the electric chair, space flights and the construction of Turksib. The steppe was so flat and smooth that traveller Wafalvi Bourdon compared it with the green base of a pool table. Only instead of an ivory ball, there was a great Trans-Asian Railway express train rolling down its flat surface, making 60 kilometers an hour. The predictions coming true are very easy to explain, argued Jules Verne. Before writing about a scientific discovery, I do extensive research, examine all available sources, draw my own conclusions, and rely on a great number of facts. As for the accuracy of the description, I read extracts from newspapers, magazines, books, research papers, and various reports that are published at the time and regularly updated. These notes are catalogued and used as material for my novels.
Заметки тщательно классифицируются и служат материалом для моих повестей и романов.
They say that while working on Bombarnek and Strogoff, Verne not only used materials available to the public, but also some mysterious archive. It is possible that Jules Verne was granted access to some documents relevant to the Kazakh history by Alexandre Dumas and his son. What were those mysterious documents and what does Pushkin have to do with it? These are the blind spots in the history of world literature. Chapter 3. The Strangeness of Fate. Wild and East mountains and the sparkling sea, all this inevitably doubled the power of Pushkin's melancholic energy, nourishing his poetic genius. And indeed, he threw his poems from the shores of the Caspian Sea to Russia, and the Asian wind carried them as far as Moscow and St. Petersburg. On the 21st of September 1833, old style, he comes to visit us in Uralsk, and long have planned a tired slave the flight to the removed abode of labor and delight. This version is quite incredible. Alexander Dumas visited Uralsk, where he enjoyed and praised local delicacies, salmon and beluga caviar. Only then he was known to the world as a completely different classic writer, also an Alexander Pushkin. It was whispered that Alexander Pushkin did not die after his duel with Dantes. His death was staged. Someone else was buried instead of him, and the official ceremony did not take place at the familial cemetery. The followers of this controversial theory based their views on the poet's physical resemblance and African roots, which the Russian poet inherited from his great-grandfather and the French novelist from his grandmother. And one more thing, Dumas wrote his first novel in the same year when Pushkin died. He dedicated his next novel to the Decembrists, after which he was forbidden to enter the Russian Empire. He was also actively translating Pushkin's works. Dumas was a genius, so talented and prolific. He was able to write an enormous amount of work in such a short time. The Russian aristocracy was jealous of Pushkin, who had achieved his fame and high social status in a way that was different from most of his famous and aristocratic contemporaries. During the war, the melody of the poet's lyre was drowned in the clank and roar of weapons and arms. In peacetime, he was obeyed by social winds and human souls. There were those who attempted to play with that passionate heart of his, the heart that pumped fiery African blood through the poet's veins. They attempted to make his heart bleed, since it appeared impossible to break it. Another version was a little less exotic. Where did this level of awareness come from? For example, about the intricacies of the steppe life. Judging from the quotes and fragments selected from this material for the book From Paris to Astrakhan, one can clearly see specific details describing 40,000 people being transferred from Volga to Ural, accompanied by the description of the tents. To learn this much in such a short period of time, some historians argue that Dumas had gained access to someone else's archives, the ones that were lost after Pushkin's death, the ones that contained information about Alexander Sergeyevich's stay in Uralsk. Perhaps something had been taken from Pushkin's archives, or maybe some other materials were handed over to Alexander Dumas in France. Of course, that was easier to put these materials to work for public and scientific purposes. 45 minutes after the poet's death, his office was sealed and some papers were seized at the emperor's order. The fate of the Pugachev files remains a mystery to this day. Only confiscation protocols have been preserved. It is unclear whether the documents were passed to Dantes through his wife, Natalia Goncharova's sister, and then to Dumas himself, or the transfer was made during the novelist's trip to the Russian Empire. It is also unclear whether the transaction ever occurred in the first place. And now we are in the hall, which is dedicated to Pushkin's trip, and here we can see different portraits of Pugachev in the center of the room.
В центре этого зала разные совершенно портреты Пугачева.
However, what is also strange is that Pugachev's uprising is never mentioned in any of Dumas' narratives, although he'd been at the scene in Astrakhan. And Jules Verne could have acquired the materials with the help of Alexander Dumas, Jr. There are a lot of strange coincidences. Just 1 year of traveling resulted in 7 heavy volumes. The only unquestionable fact is the French writer's special regard and reverence toward the great poet, and these wonderful words that were left for us. A mystery story as long as the steppe. We were crossing a real desert, flat and limitless, an ocean of heather, which in the spring would transform into the most cheerful green carpet. But now there was just one color, and it covered the whole steppe with a dull, dusty grey cloth, in some places speckled with patches of red marble.